Hello guys, today we will talk about surprising moves and spots, and how beginners can lead regular players to discover new ways of surprising their opponents. So it may sound nonsensical or boring at the beginning, but it also may sound less boring or less nonsensical at the end, I hope at least. So first, let's talk about surprising moves and positioning. I will say surprising and not outplaying, because outplaying someone means you are surprising him on purpose, which is not always the case here. So a surprising position is a position that will not be expected by your opponent, because it goes against his habits. Let's take an example. When a regular player enters a room in a game or a part of the map, he has expectations about the probable positions of his enemies, because he has seen the same situations over and over again, and he knows what are the good, or at least the usual, spots for enemies. In some ways, we could say he is conditioned. The first example which comes to my mind is when on CSGO you pick on the B of Duster 2 during a boom retake. You expect people to be at classical spots, at classical defensive spots, which means you could be surprised if someone is standing here on the middle of this box, or here, for example. It is, in most of the situations, a bad spot, because he could be picked by many angles, so there is no apparent reason for him to stand here. So you may not expect him here and lose your 1 versus 1 precisely because it looked like a bad spot. So there is nothing very original in what I'm saying here, it's basic brain. But what is interesting in it is that it will work whether he did it on purpose or not, whether your opponent was a total noob or a good player who outplayed you. So surprising moves are exactly the same thing. When a regular player encounters another player, he has expectations about his behavior, because he has seen good players react the same way over and over. So I know what are the probable reactions of his opponents. And if his opponent breaks these expectations by having an unusual or chaotic behavior, he may gain the advantage and win. For example, if I hit one of my opponents a lot and that he's very low on health, I will unconsciously expect him not to rush me without protection. But if he do rushes me, I may very well not be prepared for such aggressiveness and die, because I'm, for example, launching a grenade, reloading, or taking a medipack. So in the two examples I gave, one player is surprised, but it doesn't mean that the other player knew he was doing something surprising. In other terms, he may very well be a bad player that had no idea what he was doing. He may have rushed me without even noticing he was low HP, for example. Or on the contrary, he may be a good player who predicted his opponent's reactions and countered them. He countered them because he knew the expectations of his opponent and knew how to use these expectations against them. So whether they are caused by a smart second degree of analysis or by a lack of analysis, the surprising moves or positions are still effective. Therefore, my point in this video will be that beginners or bad players can make surprising moves that regular or pro players will sometimes reapply on purpose to surprise other good players. In other words, beginners can inspire pro or regular players in ways to move outside of the classical framework of moves and placements in a game. I will try to give some records of or testimony of this in different games. This is something that was said very early in competitive FPS history by Finaly, one of the earliest famous pro player on Quake at first. In a 2003 interview, he said, open quotation marks, predicting newbies isn't hard, but still, they move so different from a pro gamer that it actually surprises you when they dodge your shots. I think this is a great way to understand how eventually the pros are going to move in the future. So in about 3 months or so, all the pro gamers are doing these newbie moves, and you already have the edge on them because you know how to shoot that shot. If you practiced against pros all your life and out of nowhere they do this crazy move that you never seen before, it might come as a shock to you, and you might lose because you haven't seen that kind of movement before. End of the quotation. So, Fatality was one of the first to express the idea that competing against beginners could be useful, because their gameplays are often breaking the classical game style, and it helps you not to be conditioned to the same ways of playing. It helps you to react to plays that are beyond your usual frame of reference. So, contrary to things I have often read, it's not a bad thing to play against beginners or people who are really bad in comparison to you. All this show how much it is important for a player to know the degree of game knowledge of his opponents before he can decide in what way he can outplay them. I mean that he needs to know what are their expectations, to know how to break these expectations, or how to use these expectations against them. Exactly like in poker, by the way, where you can apply the same tactics against total newbies and against regular players. A great example of this is visible in the comments made about this CSGO video. So the video itself is just a good example of a successful brain attempt. It's very well known. It's Swag who is in 1 versus 1 against Kenias on Duster 2, and the boom is planted. Kenias is arriving from short with AWP to retake the site, but Swag suddenly simulates a flash grenade by launching his pistol in the air, which is not so unusual, but in this precise situation it was so unexpected that Kenias falls in the trap, looks away, and Swag picks him at this moment to finish him. What is interesting when you read the comments is that this brain, this outplaying, might not have worked on newbies. It worked because the player in front of Swag had enough game knowledge and automatism to be tricked by someone who used this knowledge and automatism against him. And on the contrary, the guys in the comments are actually explaining how they would not have fallen in the trap because they wouldn't have seen the pistol, or because they wouldn't have had the reflex to look away, or even, and more interestingly, because they would have misinterpreted the direction of the fake flashbang. So for example, a guy called Hellman says, if that were me on the AWP, I would ignore the pistol because I probably hardly saw it or would expect it to go behind me. They play mind games at that level that wouldn't work on a lot of people, but that's what makes them pros. End of the quotation. And a guy named Styx summarized the situation by a very well written sentence of Mark Twain, who, of course, is talking about the sports of his time, but the thesis is still true for today's virtual games. So Mark Twain said, open the quotation marks, "There are some things that can beat smartness and foresight. Awkwardness and stupidity can. The best swordsman in the world doesn't need to fear the second best swordsman in the world. No, the person for him to be afraid of is some ignorant antagonist who has never had a sword in his hand before. He doesn't do the thing he ought to do, and so the expert isn't prepared for him. He does the thing he ought not to do, and often it catches the expert out and ends him on the spot." End of the quotation. So this quote is the essence of what I'm talking about in this video. Being a great player at a game doesn't mean never being surprised by a player because he's just a beginner, and it implies that you can surprise other good players by playing on purpose like a beginner in specific situations. Some of this could be related to poker. The game knowledge of every adversary at the table of professional poker players is very high. In consequence, they will all play while having in mind that their opponents know the meaning of most of their actions. They are playing against people who share a great part of knowledge with them, and they try to use this shared knowledge to trick their adversaries. This shared knowledge is actually the basis of most of the ways they are tricking their opponents. But if you put a pro poker player on a beginner's table, he will know that his opponents don't have enough game knowledge to understand some of his moves. They might, for example, do all-in in a situation where it would look stupid for anyone who knows poker, and therefore surprise him. So the pro player will have to play differently to adapt to his opponent's lesser game knowledge to trick them. So it's the same thing in FPS games in my mind, even if the random factor has less impact. And actually, just by the way, I have been watching many streams on Twitch recently, and it's really funny how CSGO pros can be surprised by some unpredictable moves of beginners when they are doing Smurf. Even though if at the end of the game they are raping them, but sometimes on special situations they can't foresee some movements that bad players do and shouldn't do actually in a normal situation. So that's all I had to say. If I was a good person, I think I would search for more examples of newbie moves that were stolen and reapplied by pro players or good players in match situations. But the examples I gave are quite clear already, I think. But if you have more ideas of the situation I talked about in this video, don't hesitate to share them in the comments. Yeah, that's all. So I don't know what or when the next video will be, so hopefully see you in the following weeks.